Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. I'm Nick Barris on this Wednesday, and we're going to be talking this morning about guns, legislation, what's happening here in the Tennessee legislature this next legislative session. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about some new things going on in terms of who's being trained and where, guns in schools, guns in churches, and we're going to revisit some of the, or I guess one of the more recent, very tragic incidents, the one in Roseburg, Oregon, from a few weeks back. As we continue, and one reason I'm going to bring that up is our guest wasn't on with us, last time we were here, and John Harris is with us with the Tennessee Firearms Association. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It's good to have you as always, and appreciate it. We like to have you. There's no specific hook or reason. Sometimes we have you on when there's some flashpoint story, but we like to have you on as long as you're willing to periodically, and I really appreciate you coming on. But we'll open up the phone line, 737-7587. So often, when we talk about guns, a lot of people have strong opinions and thoughts about it. But I do always think of you because, we talk a lot, and I know you've got some strong opinions whenever I see some of these very tragic shootings.
Right.
And the most recent one, I guess, mass shooting was there in Roseburg, Oregon. And in your mind, as you recall it, was there much different in that and your reaction to it typically the same as it's been to some of the other shootings?
It's unfortunate, but the statistics show that when you have these mass multi-victim shootings, historically, they almost always occur in these regions or these zones, whether they're theaters or schools, but they're these places where the public has a perception that even if I'm a gun permit holder, I can't carry there.
Yeah.
And there's got to be some correlation going on in the minds of the people that commit these crimes, these atrocious crimes, that's a better place to go to create the atrocity than to some other location where the risk that they will run into armed confrontation is greater.
Well, do you think, because a lot of times, you may be right, but I also think they're choosing areas where they know there'll be a lot of people, maybe the last place you would think to have a shooting, be it on a community college campus or in a church. And because, let's face it, most of them who do these shootings, they're just flat out of their heads. Okay, these are kooks, and how deep they actually think, and if they're lucid enough to actually think, oh, that's posted no guns, that means I can go in there and I won't run into any opposition.
Well, that's very true in terms of what historically has been the case here in our country, but I was listening to Netanyahu talk just this week on the radio.
Israeli Prime Minister.
Israeli Prime Minister, and he was talking about 30 terrorist attacks in Israel just this month.
Can you imagine living in that
what's going to happen as the composition of our population changes and we have this risk of increased infiltration of potential terrorists in our population? So we go from a scenario where these mass public shootings are not a crazy person, but they're more like Chattanooga, where they're intentionally planned terrorist attacks. And I think even still then, they're not going to be occurring in locations like police stations or heavily armed facilities. They're going to be showing up in places where they have a reasonable expectation that they will do the most amount of damage with the least amount of resistance.
Yep. You're right about it. It's scary thinking about the domestic stuff, and not just Chattanooga, which is a good example there, but the case where the reporter and the photographer was shot.
Yes.
Now that guy was nuts, but in a way, though, it was planned, and I don't know what his gripe was with the TV station, but I mean, we've actually now. We're not carrying weapons in the field, but we did go through a special training session that was for all the local media that was kindly put on by local law enforcement, just about awareness around you, keeping your eye, how to react, what to respond, what maybe, one of the toughest things we have to do sometimes is in serious cases, criminal cases to some degree, we gotta go knock on doors. And I hate that. And sometimes, there have been times before where I'm thinking, this guy behind here may just have a shotgun and decide to blast me. That's in my mind. I'm thinking about that. And so in this day and age, more and more you think about it than ever before. And so I suppose more and more people thinking about getting weapons to protect themselves. But if they do that, and I don't have a problem with that, it's just so crucial for them to be properly trained. And I mean beyond whatever you have to do just to buy the gun, right?
Oh, yeah. The level of training, although Tennessee currently requires it, is really not a lot more than what we had for a driver's test at age 15 or 16.
Right.
If you can get in the car and drive around the block without hitting a telephone pole or a vehicle,
so it's pretty low bar.
You pass the test in Tennessee.
Right.
Well, we advocate for constitutional carry, which would, as a matter of criminal law, not have any training requirement at all. But the Tennessee Firearms Association very strongly advocates for, if you're going to make the decision as a civilian to carry a firearm all the time, some of the time, even have them in the home unsecured, that you need to go take the training to make sure you're competent and safe with that weapon, because if it's misused or mishandled, it can do a lot of harm.
Right.
And so,
but you want to leave that not to be a requirement, but to be something that's optional for an individual. I mean, if you had your druthers, it could be constitutional carry, and anyone can just go get the gun.
Right.
And then, but you don't want to have any requirement that they say, okay, you do that, and then in a few weeks you need to show us a certification that you got the proper training. Or because if you just leave it to their druthers on their own, a lot of people, maybe don't get around to it. A lot of people think they don't need it, which I'm sorry, if you think you don't need it, unless you've had some special training in the past, you're wrong. Everyone does. You need it. You're an expert. You need it.
Well, and what we know, though, is with 50 states, and the neat thing about this country is we got 50 states, 50 test spots, so we can try variables. And we have 8 states that have full constitutional carry, and one of them has had it for 200 years, Vermont.
Okay.
And we have 30 states that have constitutional carry in the context of open carry, no permit required to openly carry the gun. 60% of the country allows that.
Okay.
And what we see is, because none of those states require training as a condition to their citizens carrying under those circumstances, is that when you compare a state like that doesn't require training with Tennessee that does, you don't really see a significant material or relevant difference in accidental shootings or intentional shootings where the training makes a difference. And if the training doesn't make a difference, if you can't prove that the training makes a difference, then the government shouldn't impose it as a requirement on exercising a constitutional right.
Okay, and accidents do happen. In fact, there was a story I hit on this morning. There was an individual in McMinnville, 61-year-old fella, and there was a prowler outside his window. He grabbed his .38, and legal, and he goes to the window, opens it up, and looks out, and as he leans out, somehow the gun goes off and shoots himself in the leg.
It happens.
Oh, sure. And accidents happen with anyone. And I don't use this as an example. But it does show when a mistake happens with a gun, people can get seriously injured or killed. But at the same time, it just goes to show. I have no doubt this individual probably was properly trained. It's middle of the night. He gets up and and who knows why the weapon went off. He did something wrong. But accidents happen.
They do. I mean, we hear when I go teach classes. Frequently about stories about officers who just simply reholstering their weapons. I mean, trained police officers reholstering their weapons have accidental discharges.
Yeah. Because
the retention devices or the thumb brakes get in the way of the trigger.
Okay. So the human nature part of this is no matter what kind of training, there's always going to be some degree of mistake.
That's right, and that's why they need that awareness training.
Yeah. All right, listen, before we take our first break, let's take a quick call from our friend Joe rather. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
Just a couple of comments and a question for John.
Sure.
I might be wrong, but I thought that I heard that at the university out there in Oregon that students could have guns at the college. And the second thing is, just about every one of these persons that did these mass shootings, if you go back and look at their background, they're very similar type people. A lot of them are loners, don't fill in with the rest of the crowd, and don't stand out. In fact, at the Oregon shooting, at first the reports was that he wasn't a student and all that, and then at the end they found out that he was a student at the college. So, but nobody really knew him that well, and he didn't associate with any people and didn't have girlfriends or whatever. I mean, they're strange people to begin with. But, I'm for a little bit stronger background checks, and these people that's buying guns for other people and stuff like that, that needs to be taken care of. But that being said, one other question I had was, still don't know on the MTA bus system or the train, is it legal or not illegal if you have a gun permit to have your gun those public transportation.
Like on buses or the like? Okay. Yeah, you know, I'm not certain on that. You may not. I mean, can you carry a gun on a Metro bus? You know, MTA bus? I don't know. Or on the Music City Star?
They're not off limits by statute. So if they're off limits at all, it's because somebody in Metro has made the decision that they're going to post them.
And that's possible. That is possible. And I don't know about the Music City Star. And once again, though, if it's concealed, no one's going to know you have it.
Well, that is true.
Law. That's the thing. Most people want to be law-abiding, okay? But you know as well as I do, there are guns everywhere, and you don't know it, including in plenty of places where it's posted no weapons. If it's concealed, people are walking in there with them.
And our legislature's aware of that sort of, you know, if they don't see it, you know, no harm, no foul, because they actually put on the books in 1989 a safe harbor statute. And what it says is, if someone is illegally carrying a firearm, because say they're on a bus that's posted, or the you know, the train, or in a building, and the only reason that it's discovered that they're illegally possessing the weapon is because they were forced to use it in justifiable self-defense, that they cannot even be charged with illegally possessing the weapon. So our legislature
kind of took that into account, thinking, okay.
Yeah, they sort of took it into account. Now, is it the best policy to have? Well, it's better than no policy or allowing them to be charged.
I'm wondering if that's come up.
Oh, it does. It does. There's actually an appellate court decision.
I know, but have there been a few cases where maybe an individual pulled a weapon to defend himself or someone else in a setting where it was prohibited, and it just came up where, yeah, he shouldn't have had it here, but we're not going to charge him because of what he did.
There's a specific case that was in the news 2 or 3 years ago about an off-duty police officer that was carrying in a restaurant before they were allowed to carry in restaurants. Okay. And if I recall correctly, he was in the men's room and assaulted and had his weapon with him.
Okay.
And it would have been illegal for him to be there at the time, but he couldn't be charged because of the safe harbor statute.
Did not know that. Interesting. All right, listen, let's take a break on that note. When we come back, Greg, Mindy, and others, stay where you are. We'll get to your calls. The lines are open, 737-7587. Also want to get with John about what he sees our lawmakers doing this next legislative session. There are always a handful of gun bills, correct?
Oh, yes.
Always, always. So we'll get into that. And again, any of your thoughts on some of these topics when it comes to weapons? I know Tennessee, it's a state where people love their guns. We'll be back with more right after this.